My early days, you've got to remember when because of the way that turf moor is, and it sits in a hollow in the centre of the ground virtually, and I remember Danny Blanchard telling me one time, he said, you know, because they used to come over, they used to get on the train, I think, to Manchester Piccadilly, and then they'd get a coach over here, and Danny said to me, he said, I played a few charity matches with him and things like that, and he's a great raconteur, great storyteller, and he said, oh, the lads used to go very quiet when they used to come down Manchester Road, he said, and see turf moor down in that hollow. He said the young players used to go very quiet, you know. And I said, what was your impression, Danny, of turf moor? He said, the rain is grey, he said, and they come at you out of the mist. And there's an element of that in the town, so that when I was a kid, the town used to be deserted. It was early kick-off because of pre-floodlights. And the town would be deserted, and I was too young to go on. And particularly in summertime, you know, the early days, August, September, when the days were still a bit balmy, even in Burnley, although it's a town which is notorious for its rain, thanks to Pendle Hill and things surrounding it. But on those days, you know, you'd sit out on the front stoop, you know, with the cat and the dog or whatever, and your gran and your mum. And in those days, people were terribly house proud, so they used to sweep their own front flags, you know, out into the street. That was your domain. And there'd be all gossip going on because he had gone on the match. Now, at that time, some of the men used to even work until about 11:30 on a Saturday morning. So they hadn't come home, so they'd go straight to the pub and then straight onto the turf. If you're going on somewhere in Burnley, you're only going on one place, you know. it's there. So the town that would be denuded, it would be a strange atmosphere. But you could hear, like an animal, you could hear the roar of the crowd. And of course that was electric, this beast down in the centre of town where all the menfolk were. And when you were a boy, of course, that was a fascinating thing. And at the other end of the day, you know, if there weren't any roars in the town to interest you, well, the wives used to get a bit anxious about that, you know, because what was happening? There were a few muted roars because there'd be a lot of, you know, supporters, unsupporters used to mingle in those days. And then rather like sort of like cancer cells, you know, coming through one at a time. The fans would arrive back, you know, up through the town, and word would get round, you know, amongst the women folk, oh, they've lost. You know what I mean? Yeah, young lads like me would be taken indoors and you fancy an early bedtime and all the rest of it. And, you know, if the wives are really unlucky, the blokes would go for another session in the pub. They might not see them. It wasn't always like that. But yeah, and Tuesdays were when the cup replays would happen. Again, no floodlights. And Tuesday was half-day closing in Burnley. So, and I'd sit in the classroom, and it was very hard for the teachers to keep us under control because we'd be scribbling away and you'd suddenly hear, fantastic. Get your heads down. You know, it was fantastic. So you became aware of Burnley rather like a sort of an animal breathing in the centre of the town long before you were allowed to go on. But it was a privilege to be taken on. But there were genuine safety elements in those days because there were these huge crowds and these metal barriers. And I was only 8, you know, probably when I first went on. So there was always the question of where to put the kids, you know what I mean? The general safety thing was to try to get you behind a barrier, you know, because the crowds used to sway. You know, a corner would happen and down they would go, down several steps and come back up. So you had to be protected from that. But a lot of the time you couldn't see them because in these pre-health and safety days and pre-security, because people used to take on rattles and all sorts of things like that. And yeah, my granddad built me a little box that's about that wide and about that deep, and we'd go on, and the first time I remember we went on, we had to get it on, you know what I mean? So he carried it through the town and things like that, and when we got to the turnstile, he's put it on the floor and went through the turnstiles. He paid my money, went through the floor, and he just pushed it through under the turnstile after me, so nobody actually saw it. I don't think there'd be care. Nowadays you'd never get it on the ground, it wouldn't let you through, but it was always very funny because I'd get on there and I'd be chattering away and listening to the talk of all the chaps around. Everybody smoked in those days and took flasks on there, a little nip, and the fans were mixed, you know. And then he would, and then, you know, come the match, suddenly I'd stand on this stool, and I was a foot taller, guys behind me said, whoa, bloody hell, he's grown, and all that. You know? But it's a way of seeing the match, yeah, it was fantastic, yeah. What have I gained from supporting the Clarets? Most of all, a sense of family, I think. A sense of community, of shared experience with people of all sorts of ages, all sorts of leanings, all sorts of different attitudes to things. which has run like a sort of a claret and blue thread, really, through most of my life, you know, for better or for worse. I've never forgotten it, and being an actor, you know, because I work all over the world, and you'll always meet a claret fan somewhere. There'll always be somebody. It's either a claret fan, or it'll be even a Blackburn fan. That, you know, over a few drinks, you know, you'd sit down and you'd share a few yarns and all the rest of it, and that kind of links you together, you know, through time, and links you together with the town. And this town has got every right to be proud of what this club has achieved. It's been central to it, as I think I've said before, and I'm grateful to just be a tiny little part of that huge claret and blue family.